Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Middleton with another edition of Apes in the Home. Today we are going to be uncovering the mysteries of aquatic biomes. Your last video by Mr. Zirkle pointed out that a biome contains characteristic communities of plants and animals that result from and are adapted to its climate. Let's look at what that means for aquatics. Our initial image is showing the general layout of several of the biomes we will look at in this course. You'll notice that although it is not as specific or obvious as our terrestrial biomes, there are certain aquatic biomes that only happen in certain areas. For instance, coral reefs, which is the light purple in our key, is typically only found in between our 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south latitudes. This biome needs specific temperatures, which clearly means it must stay in those specific ranges. Another aquatic biome that would be found at certain latitudes would be our mangrove forests. If you don't know what they are, look them up. They're freaking awesome. There are two major ways you can break down our aquatic biomes, and that would be by looking at the salinity of the water. Salinity, just as a reminder, means saltiness. Obviously, a body of water with lower salinity would be considered fresh water, such as this waterfall here, clearly coming from a river, and it would have a low salinity. And a body of water with higher salinity would be considered marine, like this image right here of sharks and fish, and we're probably the continental shelf looking up. At this biome. There might be some coral over here. It's kind of hard to tell at the angle we're at, but we can definitely tell we are in a saltier body of water, and that would be considered a marine aquatic biome. When we look at freshwater biomes, that includes streams, rivers. Right here's our Susquehanna River, ponds, and lakes. This is Lake Erie. These are the biomes that are central for drinking water and could possibly become a point of tension in the future, although they already have in some areas, which we'll look at in class. You can just look to the west, the Colorado River. There are a ton of case studies on how that river has pretty much dried up, all because of how people are using that fresh water source irresponsibly. They've tried to look into laws and stuff like that to help out with the flow of that river. When it comes to your marine biomes, that's going to include your oceans, your coral reefs, and it's labeled here marshlands. I would like to make that a little more general and call it wetlands. Your wetlands are typically around the coastline of some sort of body of water, typically close to the ocean. If it's alongside a river, it'll be closer to the ocean. You can break down wetlands into two types. One is marshland, which is more herbaceous. It's more of a leafy, there's no wooded aspect to a marshland, whereas a swamp is wooded. You can see there's some trees in this image right here. So that would probably be more representative of a swamp. And then the last marine biome. So these are lumped in with the marine because since they are happening near a coast, you might have some saltwater intrusion. So it's definitely going to be a bit brackish, definitely saltier than the fresh water that might be pouring into that area. And then you have the estuary, which, just as a reminder, is where a river meets an ocean. Here we have the Chesapeake Bay, which is, I think, the largest estuary in North America. And here you have rivers like the Susquehanna dumping into this estuary, mixing with the ocean water. So definitely brackish, a mix of salt and fresh water. So that is what an estuary is. So Just as a heads up, when we think of fresh water, we typically think of drinking water, water used on farmland, uh, typically taking care of yards and stuff like that. But the thing that sets your marine water apart and makes it very, very important for us is algae. Algae in our marine biome supplies a huge portion of the Earth's oxygen while also being a sink for carbon dioxide. And when we say a sink for carbon dioxide, that just means that the algae actually takes in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, pulls that carbon out of the carbon cycle, and when that algae dies, it takes that carbon down with it to the bottom of the ocean, taking it effectively out of the carbon cycle. Now, this headline here says factors that affect non-mineral marine natural resources. Typically, when we think of resources in the ocean, one might think of pharmaceuticals that coral reefs give off, or the energy we could gain from tidal power. But different types of fish are definitely a type of resource that we tap into every single day. So fish are a non-mineral marine natural resource that you need to be aware of. And we're going to watch a documentary about the marine resources that we use every day, specifically fish and different type of marine animals we utilize. But the factors of where these fish live are dependent on the biome, which when we break it down, the biome and the fish that live in the biome will be affected by several things. So let's break down what some of those things are. The first thing we've already talked about is salinity. It's the amount of salt in an area, and it greatly affects the type of life that can survive in that area of the ocean. Some parts of the ocean are, in fact, saltier than others. You can see that with this diagram right here. The Atlantic Ocean is much saltier than the Pacific Ocean. That is a factor of just how small it is. It's enclosed, not enclosed, but it has these bordering continents, which doesn't let as much mixing or I guess the salt to escape as quickly. You also have the Sahara Desert right here, and wind and water, they interact pretty effectively. That wind in this region is coming from the east, moving to the west, is going to pick up some of that sand, and it's going to dump some of that sand into the water here, making it saltier. You can also see this in closed or more enclosed body of water, where water would be evaporating, leaving the salt behind, or leaving particulates behind, which is going to increase the salinity. So definitely salinity is going to affect what can live there. Depth obviously is also a huge factor. You have these coral reefs on this diagram right here, which are teeming with life, but they need photosynthesis to happen in order to sustain that life. That means that they have to be closer to the surface. And then you have these weirdos down here, black smokers, which instead of photosynthesis are going to use chemosynthesis. There's bacteria that's going to create energy from certain minerals that are coming out of a black smoker. So we'll look into that more in class. Another thing that can affect what can live in a certain area is the turbidity. Turbidity is talking about the cloudiness or the murkiness of a waterway. If it's high turbidity, you're going to have a harder time photosynthesizing if you're a plant living in that water. Whereas if it's low turbidity, sunlight can come through very easily and increase your photosynthesis that is going on, which in effect is going to affect the rest of that community or that ecosystem you're living in. Nutrient availability and temperature are also going to be a factor into what life can live in an aquatic biome. So when we look at temperature, you can see from this diagram right here, the colder the water, the more oxygen it can hold. And the more oxygen in a body of water, typically the better. Temperature is also something that most fish are very sensitive to. There's a certain range they can live in. If you go fishing, You know, there's certain areas of a river that are going to be cooler than others, and you might have different fish living in that area. So just keep in mind a cooler temperature, you're going to get more oxygen in that water. When it comes to nutrients, this image of upwelling, nutrients is super important for how things are living, how many things are living in a certain area, and this is one area we might see that. You can see here the surface winds are pushing water away from the coastline. So the surface water is being pushed away, and you're going to have cooler water coming up from the bottom. Not only is it going to bring that colder water up, which we just talked about has more oxygen, but down here at the bottom, you're going to have dead fish, fish poop, things like that. And it's going to add nutrients to this water as it rises up. Because there's more nutrients coming up here, you're going to have algae freak out. It's going to have a heyday. A lot of algae is going to bloom. And the fish are going to eat that stuff. So you're going to have a population boom in this area also. We see this a lot off the coast of South America, near the equator. You're going to have this surface wind pushing surface water to the side in an area of upwelling, and fishing is typically really good. When you have years of El Nino where this surface wind is not as strong, that's going to change this. Less fish, and therefore it's harder for the people living off that coast who are fishermen. Thank you for this edition of Biomes, the aquatic version. Feel free to email or ask any questions you may have, and we will see you next class.